In the poorest neighborhoods of Newark, New Jersey, thousands of families were promised hope. They were promised affordable homes on empty city lots. Instead, that hope bought a $90,000 Rolls-Royce. It bought luxury vacations to the Dominican Republic and five-star resorts in Puerto Rico. How? Through one of the most ruthless political betrayals in modern American history. Meet Sharpe James, a five-term, untouchable mayor who didn't just run the city, he owned it. He was a god to his people, but while the cameras flashed and the crowds cheered, he was quietly handing over the keys to his kingdom, to his secret mistress. Her name was Tamika Riley, a woman with zero real estate experience, who somehow bought prime city properties for as little as $16. Yes, $16. Without laying a single brick, she flipped them for hundreds of thousands of dollars in pure profit. They thought they had built the perfect crime. No fingerprints, no murder weapon. Just the stroke of a pen and a mountain of dirty money. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the FBI. Welcome to U.S. Crime Diaries. Get ready to go deep inside the wiretaps, the paper trail, and the shocking undercover investigation of the honest services fraud. This is the spectacular fall of a political kingpin. To understand how a man could hijack an entire city, you first have to understand the city he conquered. The year was 1986. Newark, New Jersey, was a city bleeding from decades of economic decline. The deep scars from the devastating 1967 riots were still heavily visible on the streets. Industrial jobs had completely vanished, leaving behind crumbling brick factories and boarded-up storefronts. Crime rates were soaring, poverty was suffocating the neighborhoods, and the citizens of Newark were desperate. They felt completely abandoned by the system. They did not just need a politician, they needed a savior. They needed someone who understood their pain, someone who could rise from the very streets they walked and take on the broken establishment. They found that exact savior in a man named Sharpe James. When Sharpe James first ran for mayor, he was an absolute force of nature. He was charismatic, athletic, relentlessly energetic, and fiercely intelligent. He walked the roughest neighborhoods, shook hands with the working class, and promised to rebuild Newark from the ashes. He positioned himself as the ultimate man of the people. And the people believed him. When he won the election in 1986, defeating the city's incumbent mayor in a historic upset, it was not just a political victory. It felt like a revolution. To the citizens of Newark, he was the beacon of hope they had been praying for. And for the next 20 years, he ruled that city like an absolute monarch. Sharpe James served an unprecedented 5 consecutive terms as mayor. 2 solid decades of unquestioned, unrivaled power. In Newark, absolutely nothing happened without his explicit approval. If you wanted to open a major business, you needed his blessing. If you wanted to build a skyscraper or develop a block of apartments, you had to go through his office. He controlled the massive city budget. He heavily influenced the city council, and his political machine was ruthless. He had eyes and ears in every ward and every precinct. Governors from across the state needed his endorsement to win elections. National senators feared his grassroots influence. He became a towering political titan in New Jersey. Anyone who dared to run against him in an election was swiftly and politically crushed. He was, by all accounts and appearances, entirely invincible. But absolute power has a funny way of changing a man. Over those 20 years, a dark and deeply hidden duality began to emerge within the mayor's office. On the outside, Newark was still struggling. While there were some small pockets of revitalization, thousands of citizens still lived in crushing poverty. The South Ward, in particular, was littered with empty, overgrown lots and abandoned homes that had become havens for street gangs. Residents struggled to pay rent in broken-down neighborhoods, fighting daily against urban decay. Yet, the mayor's personal lifestyle began to quietly and drastically change. His official government salary was around $150,000 a year. A good living, certainly, but nowhere near enough to fund what was happening behind closed doors. Whispers began to echo through the marble halls of City Hall. Quiet rumors of a lifestyle that far exceeded the paycheck of a humble public servant. There were stories of exotic, prolonged Caribbean vacations to 5-star resorts. There were murmurs of luxury yachts cutting through the waters. There were sightings of expensive dinners, tailored suits, and a life of sheer indulgence. How was a civil servant funding this lavish double life? For years, nobody dared to ask the question out loud. The local press couldn't pin anything concrete on him, and his political rivals were too terrified of his retaliation to launch an investigation. Sharpe James had survived so long at the top that he truly believed he was too smart to be caught. He operated with the profound arrogance of a man who believed the rules of ordinary citizens simply did not apply to him. He was the law in Newark. Who was going to arrest him? The police chiefs he appointed? The city officials he hired? He thought he had built an impenetrable fortress around himself, but he was making one critical, fatal mistake. He underestimated the federal government. While the mayor was busy expanding his empire and enjoying his secret luxuries, a quiet, invisible net was slowly being cast around his administration. The FBI had started watching. And the most fascinating part of this investigation was that the FBI agents didn't start by looking directly at the mayor's bank accounts. They started by looking at the dirt. Literally, the dirt and empty lots of Newark. They began following a bizarre paper trail of city-owned properties. These were distressed, abandoned lands that were legally supposed to be sold to honest developers to build affordable housing for the poor. Instead, these lands were being quietly handed over for pennies. And at the absolute center of this massive, multi-million-dollar real estate scam was not a wealthy developer or a Wall Street banker. It was a woman standing right in the mayor's shadow. A mysterious woman with zero real estate experience who was about to bring the entire untouchable empire crashing down. Her name was Tamika Riley. To the outside world, she was simply a local publicist and a small business owner who ran a modest clothing boutique. She did not possess a background in construction. She had absolutely zero experience in urban development, architecture, or high-stakes commercial real estate. In the normal, heavily regulated world of city planning, a person with her resume would never be allowed to handle multi-million-dollar city contracts. If she had walked into any other city hall in America, her applications would have been immediately thrown in the trash. But in Sharpe James's Newark, the normal rules simply did not apply. Tamika Riley had something far more valuable than a real estate license or a construction crew. She had an intimate, highly secretive, and deeply entrenched romantic relationship with the absolute ruler of the city. Their relationship was the ultimate catalyst for one of the most brazen, systematic political thefts in the history of New Jersey. To fully grasp exactly how they pulled off this massive scam right under the noses of the public, you have to look deep inside the broken system they exploited. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, Newark had a massive, decaying inventory of abandoned, city-owned lands and distressed residential properties. Entire blocks in the South Ward and other impoverished neighborhoods were littered with empty dirt lots and boarded-up houses. To revitalize these failing, dangerous neighborhoods, the Newark City Council and the Housing Department had created a well-intentioned redevelopment program. The government would sell these empty, broken-down lots to approved, vetted developers for literal pennies on the dollar. Sometimes these properties were sold for just a few $1,000s, or incredibly, as little as $16. But there was a massive, ironclad catch. The developers who bought these cheap lands were legally bound by strict contracts. They were required to rehabilitate the properties within a specific time frame. They had to hire contractors, pour concrete, build affordable housing, create local jobs, and bring life back to the dying community. They were strictly and explicitly forbidden from just holding the land and selling it for a profit without doing the work. It was a program specifically designed to save the poor and rebuild the city's infrastructure. It was never meant to make anyone rich. Instead, Mayor Sharpe James weaponized this exact program to make his mistress a millionaire. Using his terrifying political weight and his unchecked executive power, Mayor James actively bullied, pressured, and forced high-ranking city officials to completely bypass every single rule, regulation, and background check for Tamika Riley. When legitimate, experienced builders with millions of dollars in backing applied for these abandoned lots, their applications mysteriously vanished. They were delayed for months, bogged down in endless red tape, or outright denied with zero explanation. Many honest contractors walked away in frustration, realizing the game was rigged. But when Tamika Riley, a woman who had never poured a single ounce of concrete, who did not own a single bulldozer, and who had zero construction workers on her payroll, submitted an application, the red tape magically disappeared. Her paperwork was fast-tracked and instantly approved at the highest levels of city government. City officials and department heads who dared to question her lack of qualifications or her bizarrely fast approvals were quickly and aggressively silenced by the mayor's office. Nobody wanted to risk their career or their pension by challenging the King of Newark. By creating a climate of fear and absolute obedience within City Hall, Sharpe James essentially handed Tamika Riley a blank check to the city's real estate inventory. Between the years of 1999 and 2006, the city of Newark practically handed over prime pieces of real estate to Riley on a silver platter. She systematically acquired a growing portfolio of 9 different city-owned properties. The total cost she paid to the city treasury for all of these lands combined? A staggering, unbelievably low $46,000. In the booming, aggressive real estate market of the early 2000s, acquiring that much land in a major metropolitan area for a mere $46,000 was not just a steal, it was a daylight robbery. She was buying entire lots for the price of a used car. The citizens of Newark were essentially subsidizing her entry into the real estate market. But buying the land for cheap was only step one of the master plan. Simply owning the dirt wasn't enough to fund the luxury lifestyle they both craved. The real crime, the federal offense that would eventually bring the FBI knocking at their doors, was what she did next. According to the strict legal contracts she signed with the city of Newark, Riley was legally obligated to develop those 9 lands. She had signed documents promising to lay foundations and build homes for the community. But she did absolutely none of that. Not a single brick was laid. Not a single nail was hammered into wood. The lots remained empty, overgrown with weeds, and utterly useless to the desperate people of the South Ward. Instead of building, Riley acted as an illegal, state-sponsored middleman. Armed with the official deeds to these highly valuable properties, she simply turned around and flipped them to the very same legitimate, desperate developers who had previously been blocked by the mayor's office. She was selling them the land they should have been able to buy directly from the city, but at a massive, extortionate markup. The profit margins were absolutely staggering. A property she bought for literally $2,000 or $4,000 would be flipped just weeks later for tens of thousands of dollars in pure, unadulterated profit. Through this devastatingly simple buy low, sell high flipping scheme, Riley took the land she bought for $46,000 and sold them off for over $665,000. Over $500,000 in illicit wealth was generated without doing a single day of honest construction work. It was a flawless money-making machine, powered entirely by political corruption and unchecked greed. And as the bank account swelled with hundreds of thousands of dollars, the mayor and his mistress prepared to take their luxurious double life to an entirely new level. To fully understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this massive political crime, you have to look closely at the exact timeline and the terrifyingly precise numbers. This was not a vague, overarching scheme. It was a calculated, daily robbery of the public trust. The FBI investigators did not just look at the big picture. They meticulously reconstructed the entire fraud day by day and dollar by dollar. They discovered that the flipping scheme was systematically executed in 3 distinct, highly organized phases, leaving behind a massive paper trail of unbelievable greed. The actual execution of the fraud officially began on August 3, 2001. On this specific day, Tamika Riley, armed with the mayor's powerful secret backing and fully expedited city paperwork, acquired her first 4 city-owned properties. This initial grab was executed under what the city called Phase 1 of the South Ward Redevelopment Plan, a plan supposedly designed to help the poorest citizens of Newark. She bought the properties located at 51 to 53 St. James Place for a mere $4,000. She bought the empty lot at 47 Parkview Terrace for another $4,000. The property at 47 St. James Place cost her exactly $6,000. And incredibly, she acquired the prime lot at 829 South 12th Street for a laughable, almost insulting price of $2,000. The total, combined investment for all 4 pieces of prime city real estate was just $16,000. For the price of a cheap used car, she was now a major landowner in the city of Newark. If Tamika Riley were an honest, legitimate developer, she would have spent the next 12 to 18 months hiring construction crews, pouring concrete foundations, framing houses, and building a future for the community. Instead, she did absolutely nothing. The weeds on the properties continued to grow, The trash continued to pile up. Less than 1 month later, on September 4, 2001, without laying a single brick or hammering a single nail, she immediately put the first 2 properties back on the open market. She easily flipped 51 to 53 St. James Place and 47 Parkview Terrace to desperate, legitimate builders for $25,000 each. But the real, life-changing payday came just a few weeks later in November. On November 29, 2001, she flipped 47 St. James Place. Remember, this was a property she had just purchased from the taxpayers of Newark for only $6,000. She sold it for an astronomical $155,000. On that exact same day, she sold the South 12th Street property, which she had bought for a measly $2,000, for an incredible $130,000. The math is absolutely staggering. In less than 4 months, a tiny $16,000 investment had magically transformed into $335,000 in pure, illegal, untaxed profit. The system worked exactly as the mayor had designed it. The overwhelming, frictionless success of Phase 1 only fueled their intense arrogance. They realized nobody in City Hall was going to stop them. So, just 7 months later, on April 9, 2002, Riley confidently initiated Phase 2 of the operation. She successfully purchased 3 more heavily discounted properties from the city inventory. She acquired 592 Bergen Street, 740 South 15th Street, and 380 Avon Avenue. The city government practically gave these valuable lots away, charging her exactly $6,000 for each property. A total investment of $18,000. The turnaround this time was even faster. Just 29 days later, on May 8, 2002, the flip was entirely complete. The Bergen Street property was swiftly sold for $50,000, while the other 2 properties on 15th Street and Avon Avenue were flipped for $15,000 each. The money was flowing in faster than they could physically spend it. However, there was a brief, tense pause in the fall of 2002. The corrupt Newark City Council had actually approved another 9 properties to be handed over to Riley. But Sharpe James was a highly seasoned, deeply paranoid politician with incredibly sharp survival instincts. He sensed a shift in the political winds. He noticed that some low-level city employees were getting highly suspicious of the constant, unverified approvals going straight to his mistress. To protect his own political throne, he quietly ordered his loyal city officials to immediately halt all business with Riley. He temporarily froze the entire operation, effectively putting the real estate scam on ice to let the political heat die down. But greed is a powerful, blinding addiction. By the time 2005 rolled around, the mayor and his mistress could no longer resist the overwhelming temptation of easy money. The pause was over. On February 17, 2005, the illicit scheme was officially resurrected for a heavily amended Phase 3. Riley confidently marched back into the real estate market and purchased 590 Bergen Street for $4,000 and 86 West Alpine Street for $8,000. Because the overall real estate market in New Jersey had surged, the illegal flips were now faster and far more lucrative than ever before. By March 8, 2005, the Bergen Street property was sold to a legitimate developer for a massive $100,000. A few months later, on October 31, 2005, the Alpine Street lot was successfully flipped for $150,000. While Tamika Riley was aggressively raking in nearly $700,000 from these entirely fraudulent, state-sponsored land sales, she was simultaneously committing another, almost unbelievably brazen crime against the taxpayers. Between the years of 2002 and 2005, despite having literally hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in her bank accounts from the flipped properties, Riley was actively and knowingly defrauding the federal government by legally claiming extreme poverty. She had the absolute audacity to apply for and illegally collect up to $788 every single month in Section 8 housing subsidies. This is a federal assistance program strictly reserved for the poorest, most vulnerable citizens in America. She used this stolen government welfare money to pay the monthly rent on her upscale Jersey City apartment. She deeply desired a lavish, millionaire lifestyle, but she ruthlessly wanted the hardworking taxpayers to fund every single aspect of her existence, right down to her monthly rent check. And fund it they absolutely did. The FBI financial investigators meticulously tracked exactly where all this stolen real estate and welfare money was going. The illicit profits flowed directly into a shared, highly exclusive world of extreme luxury for the mayor and his mistress. The money wasn't quietly hidden in offshore, untraceable bank accounts. It was flaunted openly and arrogantly in the faces of the Newark citizens. The FBI uncovered hundreds of individual credit card charges executed between 2001 and 2006, totaling more than $58,000 in pure leisure spending. This stolen money paid for massive luxury hotel suites, exclusive fine dining experiences, expensive first-class airfare, and premium high-end car rentals, including the lease of a sleek Jaguar convertible. But the indulgence did not stop there. The federal investigators heavily tracked a very specific, lavish trip to the sunny state of Florida, funded entirely by the real estate flipping scheme. On this trip, the sitting mayor of Newark, a city battling severe poverty, went to a luxury dealership to personally test drive a pristine, $90,000 Rolls-Royce. The car was subsequently purchased and casually parked on the struggling streets of their city. The investigators also meticulously tracked multiple romantic, high-end getaways to a highly exclusive seaside resort in Boca Chica, located in the Dominican Republic. There were VIP trips to the U.S. Open tennis tournament in Queens, New York, expensive resort stays in Puerto Rico, and elite weekend getaways to the wealthy enclave of Martha's Vineyard. This was the true anatomy of their fraud. It was a perfect, brilliantly executed closed-loop system of total political corruption. The mayor used his terrifying political muscle and executive authority to illegally give her the city land. She then sold that public land to private developers for a massive, unearned profit. And finally, she used that exact profit to directly fund their extravagant shared lifestyle. Riley would use her ill-gotten cash to continuously pay for the mayor's international travel and luxury expenses. She was effectively funneling the stolen city funds directly back into his own pockets, in the form of lavish, untraceable gifts, high-end entertainment, and five-star vacations. They were openly laughing in the face of the law. They genuinely believed the entire scheme was completely untraceable, because the mayor never directly took a physical bribe in a brown paper bag. It was all heavily disguised as legitimate real estate transactions and innocent romantic gifts. They thought they had outsmarted the entire system, but the paper trail they left behind was about to become their absolute undoing. For years, Sharpe James and Tamika Riley thought they were invincible ghosts operating completely above the law. They believed they had committed the perfect crime. They believed that because the money never physically changed hands in a dark alleyway, they were completely insulated from prosecution. But in the modern, highly sophisticated era of federal investigations, there is absolutely no such thing as a perfect crime. Every single luxury vacation, every $90,000 Rolls-Royce payment, every flight to the Caribbean, and every flipped property deed leaves a permanent, undeniable, and highly traceable paper trail. And sitting in a quiet, heavily secured office just a few miles away in Newark, federal investigators from the FBI and the IRS were quietly, meticulously beginning to connect the dots. The FBI did not just stumble onto this massive corruption ring overnight. The federal investigation was a slow, agonizingly detailed process of financial forensics. It officially started with the dirt. Federal agents began noticing a bizarre, statistically impossible pattern deeply embedded in the city's housing and real estate department. They saw that dozens of legitimate, highly funded developers were being routinely rejected for city-owned lots. Their paperwork was being deliberately stalled. Yet simultaneously, one completely unknown woman with exactly zero construction experience was getting her applications approved in record time by the mayor's inner circle. The investigators began pulling the official property deeds for the 9 distinct locations Riley had acquired. They looked at the initial purchase prices. They saw the impossibly low total of $46,000 paid to the city treasury. And then, they pulled the subsequent private sales records. They saw the massive, immediate flips totaling over $665,000 in revenue. But the FBI knew that simply proving a bad real estate deal is not enough to put a sitting mayor in a federal prison. It is not technically illegal for a city government to sell public land cheaply, and it is not inherently illegal for a private citizen to sell that land later for a profit. To take down the untouchable king of Newark, the federal government had to prove explicit criminal intent. They had to definitively prove that the mayor of the city was personally, financially benefiting from the exact land he was giving away to his mistress. They had to follow the money through a complex web of transactions. This is exactly where the federal net began to tightly close around Tamika Riley. Agents secured federal subpoenas for all of her personal and business bank records. They subpoenaed her credit card statements, ranging from the years 2001 to 2006. They began to build a massive, undeniable financial timeline on a whiteboard. They cross-referenced her illegal $665,000 real estate profits with her sudden, extravagant spending habits. They tracked the $58,000 in pure leisure credit card charges. But the absolute golden ticket for the FBI was connecting those specific financial charges directly back to Mayor Sharpe James. Agents obtained official flight manifests from major commercial airlines. They meticulously matched the exact dates of Riley's real estate flips to the dates the mayor was flying out of New Jersey for vacations. They discovered that Riley's credit cards, which were funded entirely by the stolen city property money, were paying directly for the mayor's first-class airfare. They found the receipts for the exclusive seaside resort in Boca Chica in the Dominican Republic. They found the exact payment records for the luxury hotel stays in Puerto Rico, the VIP trips to the US Open, and the expensive car rentals. The mayor had never taken a direct bribe of cash in a brown paper bag. But under federal law, he didn't have to. To lock him away, the FBI and federal prosecutors utilized a very specific, incredibly powerful piece of federal legislation, the Honest Services Mail Fraud Statute. This specific law is the ultimate, most feared weapon against corrupt politicians in the United States. It explicitly states that a public official commits a federal crime if they scheme to deprive the citizens of their intangible right to honest services. In simple terms, when you are elected as a mayor, you owe the public your honest, uncorrupted decision-making. If you use your immense executive power to secretly enrich yourself or your romantic partner, and you use the United States Postal Service or any electronic communication to execute that scheme, like mailing a property deed, sending a credit card payment across state lines, or emailing a flight confirmation, you have committed a federal felony. The FBI now had the mailed deeds, the bank transfers, the flight manifests, and the credit card receipts. They had interviewed terrified city employees, who confessed to being bullied by the mayor into approving Riley's fraudulent paperwork. The federal government had successfully built a mountain of irrefutable, hard evidence. The untouchable king of Newark was about to realize that the federal government does not care about your local political power. They do not care how many elections you have won, or how many police chiefs answer to you. They only care about the evidence. And the evidence against Sharpe James and Tamika Riley was now a concrete wall closing in on them from all sides. The years of secret surveillance, quiet subpoenas, and financial tracking finally culminated in the summer of 2007. The federal prosecutors were finally ready to strike. The illusion of the untouchable empire was about to be shattered forever in front of the entire country. On July 12, 2007, the federal hammer finally fell. Early that morning, heavily armed federal agents, many wearing tactical bulletproof vests, descended on a residential home in Jersey City just before 1:30 in the afternoon. The neighborhood watched in absolute shock as the FBI raided the property. They located Tamika Riley, the woman who had flipped $46,000 of city land into a $665,000 fortune. The federal agents placed the handcuffed woman in the back of a federal cruiser. The woman who had casually driven a $90,000 Rolls-Royce was now sitting in the back of a police car, facing the complete destruction of her life. Simultaneously, the breaking news flashed across every major television network and newspaper in New Jersey. That exact same day, a federal grand jury sitting in Newark returned a devastating, highly comprehensive 33-count indictment against former Mayor Sharpe James and his mistress. The federal indictment was a massive, highly detailed document that laid out every single aspect of their 6-year criminal enterprise for the entire world to see. The official federal charges were absolutely staggering. They included multiple counts of mail fraud, fraud involving a local government receiving federal funds, and the devastating charge of conspiracy to defraud the public of honest services. For Tamika Riley, the federal charges also included severe counts of tax evasion and housing fraud for illegally collecting the $788 a month in Section 8 housing subsidies, while she was sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit real estate profits. The city of Newark was completely paralyzed by the news. The man who had ruled them with an iron fist for 20 unbroken years, the man who had walked their streets and promised to be their ultimate savior, was now facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The untouchable king had officially been dethroned by the exact paper trail he thought he had so cleverly hidden. The profound arrogance that made them believe they were smarter than the system had led them directly into the ultimate federal trap. But the fight was not entirely over. Sharpe James, a man who had never lost a political battle in his entire 70 years of life, was furiously preparing to go to war against the United States government. He hired elite defense attorneys and refused to admit any wrongdoing. The stage was now set for one of the most explosive, highly publicized, and dramatic federal trials in the history of New Jersey. The trial that followed the explosive July 12, 2007 indictment was a relentless media circus unlike anything the state of New Jersey had ever witnessed. Sharpe James, the towering political figure who had single-handedly dictated the future of Newark for 20 unbroken years, was now completely stripped of his mayoral power. He was forced to sit at a defense table in a sterile federal courtroom and silently listen as the United States government systematically dismantled his entire empire piece by piece. The federal prosecutors brought forward a parade of terrified city officials who finally broke their long silence. These were the men and women who testified under oath about the intense, suffocating pressure they faced from the mayor's inner circle. They described in vivid detail how normal, legitimate applications for the 9 city properties were purposefully thrown out or ignored, while Tamika Riley's completely fraudulent paperwork was aggressively forced through the system in record time. The high-priced defense attorneys fought back viciously. They desperately tried to portray Sharpe James not as a corrupt criminal mastermind, but as a deeply dedicated public servant who simply made a few administrative errors. They argued in front of the jury that the $46,000 purchase price for the 9 pieces of land was completely legal under city statutes. They claimed that the subsequent $665,000 in immediate flips was just the lucky result of a booming real estate market, not a pre-planned criminal conspiracy. They fought tooth and nail to separate the romantic relationship from the real estate transactions. They claimed the $58,000 in luxury credit card charges, the extravagant trips to the Dominican Republic, and the $90,000 Rolls-Royce test drive were simply the innocent, generous gifts of a successful businesswoman to her boyfriend. They hammered on the fact that the mayor never directly took a physical bribe, but the jury saw right through the expensive smoke and mirrors. The federal prosecutors methodically displayed the undeniable chronological timeline on massive screens in the courtroom. They showed the jury exactly how the $788 a month in Section 8 housing welfare was being actively stolen from the federal government, while Riley was simultaneously depositing massive 6-figure checks from private real estate developers. They hammered home the undeniable, tragic fact that the impoverished citizens of the South Ward were left with empty, trash-filled dirt lots instead of the affordable homes they were legally promised. On April 16, 2008, after weeks of exhausting testimony and explosive financial evidence, the jury retreated to deliberate. When they returned to the courtroom, the absolute reign of Sharpe James officially ended. The federal jury convicted the former mayor on all 5 counts he faced, including the completely devastating charge of honest services mail fraud. Tamika Riley was also found completely guilty on all 13 counts against her. The untouchable king had been legally and publicly dethroned. The absolute climax of this incredible downfall occurred 3 months later, on July 29, 2008. The massive federal courtroom was completely silent, as United States District Judge William J. Martini took the bench to deliver the final sentences. The judge did not hold back. He openly reprimanded the former mayor for his sheer arrogance, his blinding greed, and his total, unapologetic betrayal of the public trust. For orchestrating a massive, systematic fraud that directly exploited the poorest, most vulnerable citizens of his own city, the 72-year-old Sharpe James was sentenced to 27 months in a federal penitentiary. In addition to the heavy prison time, the judge ordered the disgraced politician to pay a massive $100,000 fine. Tamika Riley, the woman who had manipulated the city system to fund a life of extreme luxury without doing a single day of honest construction work, faced her own severe reckoning. She was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison for her central role in the massive land fraud, the deliberate tax evasion, and the brazen housing fraud. Furthermore, she was strictly ordered to pay $27,000 in direct restitution to the federal government to repay the Section 8 housing assistance she had illegally stolen. Judge Martini ordered both Sharpe James and Tamika Riley to officially surrender themselves to the Federal Bureau of Prisons on September 15, 2008. There is absolutely no parole in the federal prison system. You serve the exact time you are given. The man who had once ruled Newark with an absolute iron fist, who had commanded entire police forces, heavily influenced state governors, and completely dictated the skyline of the city, was entirely stripped of his immense power, his public dignity, and his freedom. He was reduced to a simple, heavily guarded inmate number in a federal facility. The 9 properties they stole from the public eventually found their way back into the legal system, but the deep, underlying betrayal left a permanent, unhealing scar on the city of Newark. The taxpayers had been robbed, the poor had been ignored, and the system had been entirely corrupted from the inside out. The Honest Services Mail Fraud Statute had successfully taken down one of the most powerful, deeply entrenched political machines in the entire country. The story of Sharpe James and Tamika Riley stands today as one of the most brazen, meticulously documented, and utterly devastating cases of political corruption in American history. A chilling, undeniable reminder that no matter how powerful the political king may be, no matter how invincible the empire seems, the permanent paper trail will always, inevitably, lead directly to the throne. The story of Sharpe James and Tamika Riley is more than just a tale of one corrupt politician and his mistress. It is a stark, undeniable warning about the intoxicating, destructive nature of absolute power. When a leader believes he is the law, when he surrounds himself with terrified officials, and when the system is deliberately rigged to exploit the very people it was built to protect, the entire foundation of a city crumbles. The desperate citizens of Newark spent 20 years blindly trusting a man who was quietly selling off their future for a $90,000 Rolls-Royce and a few luxury vacations to the Caribbean. He thought he was completely untouchable. He thought the rules simply did not apply to him. But in the end, it was a simple, undeniable paper trail of $4,000 dirt lots and credit card receipts that finally brought the invincible king to his knees. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of the most brazen political frauds in modern American history. If you found this investigation fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to U.S. Crime Diaries for more dark, twisted, and entirely true stories from across the country. Here at U.S. Crime Diaries, we meticulously expose the crimes that the powerful try to keep buried. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the 27-month sentence given to the man who orchestrated a $665,000 fraud against the poorest citizens of his own city. Was it enough time behind bars? Thank you for tuning in to U.S. Crime Diaries. Until next time, stay vigilant, and remember, the truth always leaves a paper trail.